Hello, everyone. Welcome to Atomo. My name's Andrew. This is check the Superwatch, April 13th, 2023. And if you're from Thailand, Sawadee be mai. It's Happy New Year. The 13th is the Songkran New Year. You see a lot of water throwing competitions. That was always a lot of fun while in Thailand. Today on my lovely background, I got a nice Canadian forest of maple leaves with a bald eagle flying through it. Well, why is this? Well, we got the Battle of the Titans, and I don't mean Canada versus the USA. We have the Davos crowd versus the Neocons. So Davos crowd is a term that's going around, and my citation here for this talk is a gentleman by the name of Tom Luongo of the Gold Goats and Guns. Pretty good analyst for an old kind of retired chemist. I shouldn't call him old. No, be nice to Tom. Wise in his ways. And he's been really, what I like about Tom is he's a board gamer, and I'm a board gamer too. And one of the things that you do when you're board gamers is you learn how to read the board, you learn how to read the strength positions of the people who are playing. And once you have more than two players playing a board game, and given it's not just a silly roll the dice and move and then whatever happens, there's more collaboration, cooperation, or interaction of any sort with the other players. Then what happens, it actually becomes a game of diplomacy and politics. All games, when you have multiple players at the table and there is some way that the players can interact, then there are political maneuvering you can do. A long time ago, played a game called Game of Thrones. There's actually a board game, and yeah, you can make backroom deals with the other players in order to shape the board or to stop somebody from getting ahead. So in this talk, we have the Battle of the Titans going on. We have the Neocons versus the Davos crew. Now, if we look at the world as a game board, you look at each country, and the countries are not necessarily working as that whole country's specific interest. There are factions that are within each country. And in more of a video game parlance, for some of those of you who do play video games, if you go to Tropico is a game where you run an island, kind of a Banana Republic island, and you are El Presidente. What that game does is it mimics factions that appear within it. And you have to try to balance the needs of the factions. You can't always get all of them happy. And then there's things that you can do like, a faction that is counter to my interests is running a candidate for president, and they're gaining all the support. And in this game, when that happens, and if you are removed from office, you lose the game. So of course, if that's the stakes, then what are you going to do? Well, you can assassinate, imprison, set up, or you can do things, or you can actually, make the factions that are rooting for you actually happier, which is a good thing. It's easier to tear down all the buildings rather than build a taller building. And you can do these shenanigans. And in countries like the USA, like Europe, any large organization, you will get factioning. This is just something that happens by the nature of people have their interests. And these factions that we find within these countries, be it the Davos crowd or the Neocons, have their specific interests that they are trying to accomplish. Okay, so Neocon faction. Neocon faction is typically falls into the Republican crowd. And by that, there's a couple of groups that you see in play right now. You see the anti-China faction, China, as Trump used to say. And then you have the anti-Russia faction. The anti-Russia faction has more Democrats for it, and the anti-China faction has more Republicans for it, typically, or unless you're Lindsey Graham, then you hate them both. So in that sense, then you have these specific groups that are playing for those particular interests, and the more that they can play the interests and get froth, get people like you and I, putting up banners on our Facebook and Instagram or wherever saying, I stand with Ukraine or I stand with Taiwan. Then they try to get you into the faction and hopefully in the court of public opinion, in campaign donations, and all these pieces of the democratic industrial engine, they try to get your support. Then there's people who kind of look for the truth, and this is kind of the thing is, I'll go to before I get there, I'll go to the Davos faction. The Davos faction are the globalists. Now, what the globalists really want is to basically bring the whole world or most of the world together. If I think of an Orwell 1984 scenario, which is kind of like we have the setup here now that's happening. We have the Five Eyes, the Western Anglo-Saxon group, which is Oceania. We have Eurasia and East Asia. Eurasia, you can think of as Europe and its assorted colonies, and East Asia as China and its assorted colonies. So you got Oceania versus Eurasia versus East Asia, but in fact, in our game board, it's somewhat different. You have the Europe, USA, and now you have kind of a Russia, China conglomerate. You have the BRICS, because you have India in there now, Iran in there, and as Saudi Arabia, there's an extra S, South Africa, Saudi Arabia added to it now. You're seeing this pivot happening. And so in the game board, what we have are these basic factions that are vying and fighting. This is the Clash of the Titans. The problem that happens here is that we are potentially seeing an empire in collapse in our time through the USA basically being rotted out from the inside. So you have the Biden regime right now in the USA, and it seems like wherever that regime goes, leaks are popping out. Potentially that this administration has run out the clock. It's becoming like, how can you have grossly, like, for instance, the press secretary, that dumbass Jean-Pierre, whatever, and called Canada Canada. How can you be press secretary of the most powerful nation in the world and you get countries' names wrong? She couldn't even say Canada right. Just highly insulting. And okay, great. Then you have Yellen, the Fed Treasury Secretary, used to be Fed Reserve, trying to save her pet bank. So if you look at the Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank takedown that happened, basically saw in the political industrial complex engine a part of the Democrats component get deconstructed right in front of your face, with the New York Bank, another faction. New York banks hold the Federal Reserve, and you see them trying to raise interest rates and here's the thesis here, in order to capitulate Europe. So you have Europe installing these technocratic commies within our government. In Canada here, we even have, you can see the video. Most of you watching this know the video where you had Klaus Schwab saying, "We penetrated their cabinets." Justin Trudeau and his cabinet. Basically, they're WF young global leaders. And Klaus is like, ho, 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 look what we've done. Kind of his Bond villain-esque style. People got to wake up to this stuff. If your government is not working for the interests of the people, and this is where I call out, especially the Trudeau regime and the Biden regime, are they really working in the interests of our countries? And so you see the gender ideology politics that are going on and how that's getting weaponized. You can't criticize it. You criticize it, well, we saw in Vancouver where somebody was criticizing it, and they had the sandwich board on them, and they're trying to, keep it away from our children. And that person got assaulted, and there's the one police officer like, like absolutely ridiculous. And is this what it's coming to? So part of it is get pushed back against this, but as these government regimes keep doing this, we're going to raise your taxes, we're going to push more carbon taxes, we're going to do green ESGs, or another thing that is that you have to look out for, because it's a way of bringing in these particular factions into organizations to do the biddings. Like ESG is a Davos thing. So the more that you do ESGs against for instance, in Canada here in the West, we want to develop our energy resources. Well, that's dirty. We don't want exposure to that dirty stuff. Okay, if you don't do it, then all of a sudden what happens is energy becomes extremely expensive. And as energy becomes extremely expensive, people get poorer. And as people get poorer, hey, by design, do you need some UBI, universal basic income? Do you need these handouts from the government in order to support you? And the more that you need those handouts from the government, the more that they make you subservient to those handouts, the more that they have control over you. They have dominion over you as this happens. This is part of the game plan. It's the plan. So what do? Well, they're doing things to go after your kids. That could be a whole new video, whole other video, to show how this medical industrial complex can actually, if you think about sterilization to your kids through, well, we'll go there another time. Then in order for the kids to reproduce later, they need to basically pay a huge amount of money to the medical industrial complex in order for them to be able to have kids. That aside, so you have to look at the governments that you have in power. Are they actually working in your interests? And there's no use to get jaded or black-pilled about this. If it's not happening, then you have to look for the cleanest dirty shirt when it comes election time, even at a municipal level as well. So you have to go down and look at the ticket that you're voting on and say, how many of these are like green commie trash people that are, trying to slowly stick their fingers into what you and I do on a day-to-day basis. And it's slow, it's steady. They just keep going. And as this keeps going, it starts to rip apart the fabric of the societies that we built. And even the Chinese and the Russia don't do this stuff. In the Soviet times, this kind of was done. It was more done to bring the Bolshevik revolution into play. And of course, Russia now says that wasn't real communism. That was more of stuff happening that the Anglo-Saxons were trying to set up for this. Oh, Andrew's all weird conspiracy stuff. Okay, you can call it weird conspiracy stuff. You do you, I'll do me. I'm just trying to give you and understand what's going on phase to this. So you have to also look that the Federal Reserve and the New York banks have been trying really hard to keep the Davos contingent. They're trying to run the clock down on them. So this Obama the third regime, the Biden regime within the USA, just watch them and watch them and watch them. It's almost like every move is incompetence after incompetence. And I don't think this is incompetence. This is just vandalism. How many, what was it? 1,800 or 18,000 cows that burned. You see food processing plants burning, trains falling off of tracks. Like, how in the right mind does this keep happening? Yet you can build some statue somewhere of someone's genitals scraping across the ground with colorful flags all draped over it, and yet our infrastructure is falling apart. We don't have high-speed train service like in China, or any nice things like that. Yes, Eisenhower, when for the folk down in USA, Eisenhower had great thought when he built the interstate systems a long time ago. That was great public works. That brings value to your country. What are these administrations bringing value to you? Oh, we'll clean up the environment because cleaning an environment is good. Like, don't get me wrong, absolutely love the idea. I'm not against it whatsoever. What I'm against is when it's used as a way to say, you know what, we're just going to knock down certain elements of groups of power. It's game board tactics. Back to that board game. If I can use green energy and decarbonization to weaponize the people who are funding my political opponents, then I'm going to do that. Okay? Like, especially in Canada. Oh, yeah, Western energy companies. They tend to vote conservative. Okay, doesn't quite work for the liberal red group. So we're just going to keep a boot to them. Yeah, carbon taxes and not allowing permits for the development of energy, which we can easily sell abroad as well, or even open up more refinement capacity to help out the United States. So the JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon element of this is you see a lot of flack going to Jamie Dimon. Well, he's actually starting to tear down the pillars of the Davos entrenchment that in the USA and Canada as well. First, you have LIBOR and SOFR. So there's one good thing, if you want to say one good thing about President Trump, is he brought Jerome Powell in and kept the changeover of the LIBOR to the SOFR system. So we no longer use LIBOR's 18 banks, only one American bank, I think, JP Morgan London office, that get together and they set the interest rates by just calling and kind of picking a number and saying, okay, this is what we're going to set as the price of money. And if you have any interests that go counter that, especially if there's big things that the USA wants to do, then this group of 18 gets whiff of that. And if the JP Morgan group wants to bid down the price so that you get better rates, you got 17 others that can outbid you. And I believe they take the top four, bottom four, knock them out, and then average the rest. But now that goes away because there's been enough leeway to dismantle the connection to the LIBOR system to bring the SOFR system, the secured overnight funding rate, that the US banks will be using. And that basically decouples them from the European system. So the Europeans no longer have control of this. So now it is a race against time to watch how far the euro collapses. By Fed raising interest rates is to pull the dollar liquidity out of the European system and to just dismantle the structures of power upon which these Davos factionaries sit. And as that keeps happening and happening, yes, we're taking some pain for this. And yes, you're going to hate Jerome Powell. You're going to hate the Bank of Canada governor as well, as they keep raising interest rates and making it painful for you. But do you want to live in Minority Report, where Davos basically digitizes everything, tracks your every move, and if you say the wrong things, you're in the gulag? Go read what Stalinist Russia. Go read up on that. Okay, go get the communists. Go get their laws and read their laws. You get a tenor. A lot of these things give you a tenor. Stuff that I'm saying right now that is critical of what's happening in the government would get me a tenor. That's 10 years of hard labor in the old Stalinist Soviet system. But is the USA going that way? Well, it's different. It's fascism. So you see corporatism that's happening. Corporatism is the merger of state and corporate entities. And when you have that, you have the Mussolini definition of fascism. And so, what does this look like? Well, too big to fail was a big thing back in the Bernanke era, where he was running the Fed, and then later Yellen, when he had the 2008 2009 financial crisis. Then what happened is, well, we'll do this quantitative easing because we have these too big to fail institutions that we can't let down. Now, yes, it brings me back to, saving of these big banks that we want to throw shade at. But then you have the Davos installation of Bernanke and Yellen, who said, yeah, you know what? Let's take a look at the CARES Act and the infrastructure budget. CARES Act, nasty piece of legislation, basically blowing out the budget deficits of the USA. We had something similar here in Canada. We had about a $1 trillion budget, of which I think about 350 billion of that, with a B, could not be covered with taxes. So that was left afloat. And whoa, why are we getting almost double digit inflation? Well, you know where this money goes once it goes through all the grift machines and starts to settle into the system. And you have the USA printing, you have Canada printing. Well, what's that going to lead? Well, it's going to lead to an explosion of our debt. And if the Bank of Canada and the Fed keep us at the zero bound, well, one, to quote Danielle DiMartino Booth, is, well, what do you need the Fed for if you're at a zero bound? You just print whatever the government issues as a deficit, you print against. And that was going to skyrocket your inflation. Well, what happens when inflation gets too high? You basically default on your debt, and then you can refinance or rebuild the system. And what do you mean by rebuilding the system? Well, you saw with Credit Suisse. Well, what happened with Credit Suisse is they had these COCO contingently convertible bonds that basically, when there's an incident where you're converting those bonds, you can convert them into equity within the company. And in the event that there is a takeover, or some event, say a liquidity event, when the bank basically has to restructure, then the people, usually the bondholders, are taken care of first, or first in line as creditors before equity. Well, in the Credit Suisse thing, they flipped it around. Why? The contingency convertible bonds actually have covenants that put that when stock price, I believe it was stock price, hits a certain level, it triggers the fact that these bonds can be wiped out. So they can't poison pill any takeover, because that was actually what was happening. So why am I bringing this up? Okay, well, you have this structure of these contingently convertible bonds. And George Soros talked all the time. You go look this stuff up as well. He's talked about, like consoles or perpetual debt type bonds, where if I default on sovereign debt, then what I'll do is I'll pick my winners and losers. Basically, if I have a technocratic regime that's in power and they've consolidated their power, which is the attempt that Davos is trying to do with Canada and the USA, is to squish out the neocons. We don't need them because we control. It's like the outer limits. We control the horizontal. We control the vertical. You can go look that up too. It's giving an old reference to a TV show. And as they gain control of the commanding heights of the economy, then they'll have nothing for the neocons to do. They can just basically kick them to the curb. Like Trump indictments and things like that are basically the Davos crew trying to maintain the last vestiges of power that they have. Now, whether they succeed or fail is still, it's looking a little more precarious as we run the clock down on them. So this as a part of getting control by having your financial institutions capitulate. And can you see Jamie Dimon of basically the most powerful bank in the world taking a knee to European technocrats? Really? He's going to sit down and kiss the ring of a German? A Greek? A Greek is going to kiss the ring of a German? Get down on a knee and say, take everything. Take me. Take me. Just stick it in me. Do it. Calgon, take me away. No, that's not going to happen. The Federal Reserve is not going to go quietly into the night. Bernanke and Yellen were basically setting that up, but no one wants once Jerome Powell got reconfirmed, then he started to crank up the interest rates. So he has until 2026. And the only way you can get rid of J.P. Powell is you have to end the charter of the Federal Reserve of the USA. You basically have to take away the banking charter of that, and that has to be done by Congress. Good luck. That would just completely blow my tits off if that happens, but I don't think that they're going to go to that level. Just as long as, yeah, I don't think they're going. Yeah, I don't see the resolve in there. So, what are we looking at here? So, what are some of these dirtbags in government trying to do? Well, they're trying to gin up a fight with the Russians. You see, sending weapons to Ukraine, sending money to Ukraine, antagonizing the Russians, trying to get them to do something that's going to trigger Article 5. Well, why is this important? Well, if we can't pass very expensive spending bills, what we can do is get into a war situation. No, aside here, and that's what Justin Trudeau put into the Emergencies Act into play during the trucker convoy. He wanted to keep that going in perpetuity. But thankfully, us Canadians fought back against that. And can see the power grab of what it is. Again, that was a Davos consolidation. It's like, oh, hey, great. This trucker convoy came. With that comes great opportunity. We'll put on a little show, crush them like with a bunch of stormtroopers, stomping them out, and then invoke this Emergencies Act, and then keep that power going, and kind of keep the pandemic up and running. Yeah. So, but with goading the Russians, well, then you see also the goading of the Chinese. Well, when you had that Alaska summit, so quite a while ago in the early parts of the administration, where they all met up in, I think, Fairbanks, Alaska, and you had the kind of like junior statespeople of the USA meeting up with the Chinese, and they opened by just talking about the Uyghur situation. So you come in and you can kind of start picking at the biggest pimple on your, I guess we call them guests. They're guests coming in trying to shake hands and do business. And you go and you want to squeeze your pimples. Yeah, that doesn't bode well. And then Pelosi going to Taiwan, kind of trapezing around Taiwan. That's another. The Chinese are an old civilization. They're not going, like, if you were to do this to the neocons and you were to rattle your saber in front of them and call them names, then they'll completely call them a bunch of NPCs, whatnot. Then they'll completely go off their rocker. Like, just think of red-faced Bolton, Warhawk Bolton, like war bombs. Yeah, he's not getting his war and bombs right now. He's crying like a little bitch. Yeah, we don't want these neocons doing the war thing. So that's that, like the China side and Russia side. So this Ukraine grift can stop. You think all the money is going to them? Well, again, it's just another way of draining the coffers and rerouting that money to the political engine, the political industrial complex, through things like allegedly FTX and Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And I'll say allegedly on that. Let's wait for the information to come through. As that stuff gets investigated and pops, and maybe some leaks will come of that, explaining a bit more about what happened there. So it's one of those things where you have to look around saying, am I really being told the truth? Like, you look at Nord Stream. Was I really being told the truth on that? And so here we have it. We have Europe hanging on by a thread. We're seeing if the USA can stay in play. You hear people like Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the national divorce. It's just a matter of, rather not have the USA fall apart from entities from the outside doing it. If it falls apart from entities on the inside, and that can be controlled in such a way that Davos doesn't clutch on and start to chomp on it piece by piece, then maybe there's a bit of hope here. So this is with this channel, and then a miracle occurred. Let's keep looking for that. With this, about 30 minutes in here, I think I'll call it quits. So I just wanted to have a conversation with you folk about this. So stay safe out there.